Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pressing Hypercritical, Hypercritical, Press Hypercritical. We still haven't decided on a name. We'll get there. This show is all about kind of our issues with like online business, WordPress. We're just gonna like pick things apart, tease apart little details, and hopefully it'll give you some nuggets of wisdom that we've accumulated over our combined like 30 million years of being online and doing business online. Today we're talking about social sharing. If you've ever seen those little buttons on the websites like send this to Facebook. That's what we're talking about today. And I think we have more than a few opinions on social sharing buttons, their use, their value, good and bad WordPress plugins, and so on. So we're going to go through that today. As you can see, I have David Krug here on the other side of the world. And you've dealt with social sharing for a long time. And I think the best place for us to start is actually to go back to the beginning and talk about social sharing as it was back when we first started online, and kind of how it was basically just a system for gaming the system.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. You hit the nail on the head, Malcolm, there. So when I remember social sharing, it's funny because I remember the first time putting social share buttons on a website. It was before Twitter, and it was before Facebook. I know those networks might have. Twitter, I think, was just kind of getting off the ground, but they weren't really considered a social network. It was more like a messaging platform.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook was around, but it was like private network kind of place.
Mm-hmm.
And the place that we called social media back in those days, we were primarily in places like Dig, Reddit. Reddit wasn't even that big yet. It was Stumble Upon was the big one, actually. That was the big one. That was the big social media network where a lot of us were hanging out, congregating. This was before Instagram. This was before all that. Stumble Upon was the big one, actually. But Dig was the one that we all sat around and goofed off with. That was the one we manipulated literally 24/7. At least I know I did. There was a bunch of us. So
for those that don't know, what was Dig?
So back in the day, Dig was a place you could take a link, usually something you'd share on your own personal website or one of your client websites, or somebody within your network of people. And it would usually pop up in like an AIM, if you guys know what that stuff is, AOL Instant Messenger. Someone would send me a message on AOL Instant Messenger and would say, "Hey, David, would you share this on your Dig account?" And I'd say, "Sure, no problem." So then I'd take their link from their website, to put it into my Dig account, share it, because I was like one of the first 150 users on Dig. So I'd share it, right? And then I would tell them it's shared, send them the main link, and then we'd all come in and just mob it and get it on the front page. And that was social media.
Yeah, it was one of the first places where there was this like upvote, downvote mechanic to determine kind of what stories should percolate to the homepage and be shared to everyone. And I remember, back when it first started, you only needed like 15, 20, 25 upvotes to kind of get in the queue to be on the homepage. And of course, that number expanded as the network got more popular, but so did the ways to kind of game that system. Until I think they did like a version 2 and a version 3, and they kept on trying to change their algorithm to try to lower the value of people like Krug with his very old account. And old accounts were kind of more powerful in a sense. They had the ability to really kind of get on the homepage more easily for some reason, and they adjusted their algorithm to try to get rid of that advantage. But you already made like connections to like thousands of people, and there were rings and groups all over the internet of people working together to kind of elevate their content, right?
Yeah, and that was the crazy thing was back in those days, like you could take a piece of content, and I actually had like 3 Dig accounts, all really old. And so if they'd shut one down for a little bit, and they would have never really shut it down, they did some like shadow banning, more of like sites, not necessarily accounts. Like they didn't really mess with one account, that a couple of my accounts. One particular account, I think they shadow banned it, but they didn't say anything. But there's so many ways to get around it. But basically, the thing about it that was crazy was no matter how many times they kept changing the algorithms, we created different groups. So like some of us would have like finance. There was like 80 people that I knew that had finance websites. and they would all share our own content like in a circle. Some of them had we had celebrity gossip sites like entertainment, celebrity news kind of stuff. There was different ones like technology. There was a bunch of us, probably like 200 people that I knew, like just in, instant messenger that we would just share a link back and forth, and bam, we would all of a sudden we'd hit that link really hard.
Talk about the results of that. Talk about what would happen when you get to the homepage of one of those sites.
So it depended. So back in those days, if you get on the homepage, and it was just a very mainstream, like link baity kind of thing. What I mean by mainstream would be like top 20 most popular celebrities from the 80s, or something like that, right? Something like that. Initially, you would get on the like your initial search to get on the homepage usually took about 1,000 visitors would come to your website, and then it would all of a sudden go from 1,000 all the way up to 10,000 on average. 10,000 within just a few hours, and sometimes you would get 100,000 visitors over the course of a week just getting on the homepage.
Yeah, we used to talk about like the dig effect. There used to be sites that were actually crippled and crushed by the amount of traffic coming to them from these different social media sites like StumbleUpon and Reddit and Dig. If you got onto the homepage, and Reddit still has that effect today, but Dig has kind of waned and been sold multiple times and been redeveloped and all of this stuff, and it's not really the social network that it once was. StumbleUpon, I'm sure there are people that still use it, but it's not really kind of in the. Sorry?
It's closed down now. Now it's called Mix.
Okay.
It's different than other social network that was also called Mix. So.
Right. And these things, they change over time. But kind of fast forwarding to today, the popularity of the idea of social sharing and the effect that it used to have isn't necessarily what we see today. And why don't you talk a little bit about kind of what we see today when we try to share things?
Well, it's fascinating. So there still is something like the Facebook effect.
Mm-hmm.
When something goes viral on Facebook, there's still this massive explosion of traffic and everything. I've seen some similar things that happen, but Facebook actually kind of shuts it down a little bit.
Yeah, so I just want to interject real quickly. One of the things I've noticed about Facebook is Facebook wants to keep you on Facebook. Right? They don't want you to go off to some other site. They don't want you to go off to read some other thing. They really want to bring that content to their platform. So if you have a viral video, that video will play in an embed in Facebook. If you have an article or picture, that will show up within Facebook often, because they don't want you to leave. They want you to stay there forever and keep sharing the things that you found. And so the direct traffic to your site isn't necessarily as high as it could be, because the audience is so huge. You would expect the traffic to crush everyone. Anytime you had a viral thing on Facebook, you'd expect your site to go down. And that isn't necessarily the experience a lot of people are having.
It's almost, you're right. It's almost like to the point now where it's negligent. There still is a little bit of that where you'll get, a few thousand visitors here or there. A lot of that is spurred on by some viral campaigns mixed with ad campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you'll see like a hybrid kind of thing going on. It does happen, but it's not nearly as big as it used to be. So other networks are similar to that. Twitter would be the other one where there's kind of like a Twitter effect now that happens, where everything kind of goes viral on Twitter, or if you end up on the Twitter trending, or if you're a very controversial figure, you can really push a lot of traffic around that way. But it's nothing like it was in the old days in terms of just being able to take it and say, okay, we're going to get on the homepage at Dig today. This was something I used to do like every single day. It was just like, okay, I'm going to get something on the homepage at Dig. And I would ask my friends, you guys have something you want shared today? And it was just something I did as part of the community, as part of just being around, having an old account. I would ask people, hey, can I share this for you? Sure, no problem. And it really wasn't commercial either. Like, so a lot of our sharing and manipulation of social media in those days, it was not as commercial. It became commercial later, but in the beginning it wasn't commercial. It was more just out of joy.
Yeah, I mean, just like with the changeover from MySpace to Facebook and Instagram to Snapchat and the 100 other social media sites that exist, we're seeing the exact same thing with social sharing. It used to be there was like a handful of sites, and now today there's like social sharing for, every sub niche. There's a million different brands trying to make their own social sharing. It can actually be kind of overwhelming, and you can definitely expect there to be manipulation on some of these smaller social sharing platforms. So there might be a little bit of like an echo chamber. Like if there's one about finance, maybe a little like stock team or mutual fund team has gone in there and really kind of taken over it. So question everything when you're on a social sharing site. The number of upvotes or the number of shares might kind of be inflated due to these kinds of tactics that have existed for a very long time. Moving on from there, though, you can only put so many social sharing buttons on your website. And I mean, there used to be this one, like share everything or share all or something like that, that used to actually have a drop down, and you used to have like 64. Oh, there goes my camera. You used to have like 64 different like social sharing buttons for like all these different networks. And I think if you did that today, if you put all the social sharing networks in a share button thing with a drop down, it'd probably be like 1,000 different networks. So I highly recommend avoiding that. And I mean, when our clients come on board, one of the things that we talk about is speed and performance. And in your experience, are social sharing plugins fast, slow, worth having, worth avoiding?
I basically tell everyone that we don't let people run social share plugins on their website because, again, the plugins themselves no. Because you're talking about pulling in usually code and APIs from every single network, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, all these different things. They want to know how things are being shared. So what they do is they have their own APIs, they have their own JavaScript, and this is all wrapped around some more JavaScript inside of a plugin that it's just not worth it. It's not worth it for performance.
Yeah, especially if you see like the share count number. So if you've gone to a site and it's like, 99 shares on Facebook or whatever, there's a system of communication happening there. It doesn't just track the number of clicks that you have on your website for that social sharing button. It actually goes to Facebook and says, hey, how many times has this been shared? Independently of if it's been shared on your website, how many times has it been shared on Facebook? And so that communication that's happening is slow, especially when you consider it could be happening on Reddit and Facebook and all these other services that exist today. So yeah, we do recommend that people kind of not use them, and the stats kind of back that up, right? Like social sharing is not huge anymore. Like when people go to your website, they don't typically share your stuff from your website. What's really interesting is people will reshare things on Facebook, or they'll reshare things or upvote things on Reddit. But sharing directly from your website is actually pretty rare. I read a stat on a website that said 43% of professionally marketed blogs receive fewer than 10 interactions. On Twitter, Pinterest, Google+, and LinkedIn, more than half of all posts receive fewer than 10 interactions. That's huge, man. You maybe getting 10 shares from a professionally marketed blog post, that's rough. That's really rough, don't you think?
Well, it goes even crazier than that. And so there's another study by MoveWeb. It said, they analyzed 61 million mobile sessions and discovered that 99.8% of mobile users never engage with social share buttons. Never. So think about that for a minute. 99.8% of your mobile users, which the whole web is going mobile now. Yeah. Like most search traffic these days is mobile. 99.8% of those people never land and on your website and then take action on those social share buttons. 99.8. So the 0.02% of users that you're sitting around there slowing down your website to use those buttons just isn't worth it. I mean, that statistic to me blows everything out of the water because, the whole web's moving to mobile and everything's moving to mobile and, users they just don't use those buttons. That being said, I can't tell you how many times after I've removed social sharing buttons from a website, from a client website. Sometimes if I tell them or if I don't tell them or whatever, the first thing they tell me is this: hey, can we get some social sharing buttons on there?
Why is that? So that's a really good point. And I know a lot of people who are going to watch this and listen to this are going to go, I have to have my social buttons. What will I do without them?
I figured it out, and it's a psychological thing that, especially because a lot of the webmasters that we're around, right? They're always on their websites. They're building something. They're content heavy. They're really deep into content. And the first thing they want to do after they publish a post is share that post with their own social network, within their network, so that it gets shared. And for them, the first thing they do is they click a social share button on their own website and share it. Just bam. And the reason for it is simple, because they trust that interaction. They trust the interaction of their own website sharing it to one of these social networks. But the problem with it is this. I don't know if you remember the original days of social media, like with Twitter especially. If you had one of these social sharing buttons, if you clicked the Twitter button, it would automatically send out a tweet.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that tweet wasn't formatted right, or it was formatted it would share one tweet by the plugin owner, and the second tweet
my goodness.
plugin you wanted. There was a lot of controversy about the things that were getting shared automatically, or you gave permission for this plugin to have control over your things.
Oh yeah, when I first started out, I mean, as soon as you would publish an article on WordPress, we had plugins that would automatically post to Twitter, to Facebook, and even to Reddit, even if you wanted to. So there was lots of like automated sharing that was happening, which contributed to the noise of the whole thing.
And it gave people, I think, a lot of web users a distrust in those buttons.
Mm-hmm.
Just distrust in general of touching those buttons. Like, they're not there to share. I hate to say it. They're there to consume, not share.
Right.
And that's the thing that a lot of webmasters or publishers, online publishers, they forget. The users are there to grab your information and do something with it, and that's consume it. They're not there to share it.
But I mean, if I can get 99 people to share my thing on Facebook and it says 99, then the next person that comes is more likely to share it, right?
No.
But why?
It just never worked that way. People just they glance over those numbers. In fact, the same study that I was telling you about, here's the crazy statistic that just blew me out of the water, right? The same users, 99.8, that 0.02%, all those people are much more likely to click ads than social share buttons.
Right. And I think part of the whole, we expect people to be kind of that follower mentality of, if this is popular already, I want to be part of that. But that's not really the typical social sharing type personality. They want to be the first person to share something. They want to see that number basically say 0, read the article and say, this is the most interesting thing ever, and be the first person to share it. So having those numbers, having those links that show 800 shares or 1,000 shares actually are a deterrent to those types of personalities, because they don't want to jump on the bandwagon. They want to be the person that discovers something. And so you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by having those numbers, thus that extra code, thus the slower site speed, by not giving those kinds of first movers that advantage. And the people that want to share something, that want to uncover something and be the first to find something, they'll share it without those buttons. We've seen it. It's happened.
Well, and this is what I have noticed about the internet. And it's crazy, but the number one social media platform on the planet is not one we talk about. It's email.
Yeah.
It's still the one major place where people will share content, right? So here's the thing. I don't subscribe to a lot of email newsletters anymore. I literally go through once every month and get delete all, just delete everything, right? But here's what I've noticed. If a friend or someone I trust, doesn't have to be a friend, just someone I trust, sends me an email, says, hey, check this out, right? I will literally jump out of my chair and do it.
Right.
Literally, I am that kind of person. If you send me a link, it says, hey, check this out, bam, I'm jumping out of my chair. I'm jumping into the email. I just got a notification, and bam, I'm sharing. I'm looking at it, right? And I think that's how real people share content. Or some people within Messenger, right? You read an article and you're like, bam, I'm going to send it to you on Messenger or whatever, or within our Slack channels. And that's where social media, I think, is really taking place right now.
Very much more that one-to-one, right? It's less about I'm going to show this to the world that I have found this article, or I'm going to show this to the world that I'm going to tweet this out to all of my followers. It's very much that kind of one-to-one, my my brother needs to see this, or my best friend needs to see this, or very close connection based these days. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I have personal groups like WhatsApp groups, and here in the Philippines like Viber groups, and all these different like social networks are like messaging platforms, and that's where I share most of my interesting content within circles of friends, or they send me links or whatever. And I think social media is still happening, but it's not happening the way publishers think it is, where someone's sharing something from one of these social buttons.
Yeah.
It's not happening that way anymore. And I think unfortunately the publisher platform hasn't moved in the direction, because there's nothing you can do on your website, in my opinion, that's going to convince people to take that link, that article, and send it to somebody on X network. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can do. It's just something they're either going to do because they found it interesting, and that's the secret, is to create something totally awesome and amazing and interesting, because it'll get shared. But having those buttons there, I don't think it actually contributes anything to the web. It's almost it's nothing. There's nothing. It's just like a little flashing thing. Like way back in the day, there was like a GeoCities visitors count.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's just like these little flashing things that are so annoying that aren't doing anything, and they're like, you see it and you're like, nope, not touching that site. See ya. It's like it almost makes me want to share the site less.
That's interesting, because I mean, for people like us and our generation especially, we've hit that saturation point where we've gone through this kind of marketing focused version of the web, and now are very kind of jilted about the whole thing. And the younger people that I've talked to, I mean, when they're sharing something, again, like we discussed before, it's very one-to-one or one to a small group, not one to their entire audience. They have interests in, like, let's say photography, and they share that with their friends that they know have an interest in photography. They don't tell everyone in the world, I'm interested in photography. So there's a definitely a transition happening, and one that businesses are lagging behind on, because they think that having these buttons makes them safe. But let's say through this entire conversation, someone's listened to all of this and they go, but I have to have them. Are there any ways that you recommend kind of implementing them? Are there speed or optimization friendly ways of doing it? Or is it just kind of a yes or no kind of situation?
Yep. So let's backtrack a second. Yes, if you really, really, really have to have it and someone points a gun at my head, I will tell them you can have them. And you can do it statically, which is, I think, the best way to do it. You kind of build it into your theme or your custom design, and you can build like a very static, very it's very neutral. There's a couple sites that I've seen it where they kind of blend it into the content. You can't really tell the share buttons are there. Those, I think, are more friendly. In fact, I'm not opposed to them. So those are okay. But I want to backtrack a little bit.
All right.
Because there's something really cool that I'm noticing. And I think where we can kind of segue a little bit here is, in the old days, you had all these different like social media communities, like, and Reddit's done a good job of that in terms of transitioning.
Right.
Like, let's say you run a photography website, right? And you might share your content within your photography community. Well, the thing that I've noticed already is some businesses actually developing communities within their website, where they have, and maybe not even necessarily their customers. It might be people they know that are interested in some of the topics that they're experts in. Like, they create these expert communities on Slack or on forums or whatever within their own website. And that's become the new social media.
Which is funny, because that's where it started, right? If you think back to the days of IRC and like, AIM groups and things like that, that's where it all started, right? It started in these little like pocket communities. People used to have like, PHPBB on their website or vBulletin on their website, and have these like forums for discussion and community and connection. And then it centralized into these kinds of, mega websites. And now we're kind of going back to this decentralization of social media, which will make it much harder for marketers to kind of take advantage of in a way, but also kind of get us back to those little pocket communities all over the web.
Well, and I think it's more authentic. Like, for example, like back in the day with like Dig, I wasn't interested in half those topics. So it really wasn't that interesting. I wasn't even a potential customer for most of these businesses. And yet there we were talking about them all day long. And so now, if I am going to be involved in a community, it's going to be one I'm actually interested in it. And we're sharing and we're talking and we're conversing. And it's interesting. And I think that's how you do it. But I think, and it can become part of your website. It can actually be part of your website, but it doesn't have to be the central, like, doesn't have to be part of a share button, or, you can just take your most recent piece of content, put it inside your own community and talk about it there. And that's what you really want to have happen. Not take that piece of content and spam it into Facebook or into Twitter or wherever.
But how will I get my 100 million views on my webpage?
Well, so here's one of the things that I noticed over the years when it came to these social media platforms. For example, when you did have something like the Dig effect, you had almost zero conversion. Like there was almost no benefit from those people coming to your website. They were just.
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading reports where people were saying they were actually losing money. They were, even though they were running like CPM ads, right? Like cost per thousand advertising. The increase in hosting costs completely offset any kind of profit they made from the extra traffic, because those users were basically there and gone again, and they weren't valuable users.
Having to add a whole like server onto your website, or upgrade your server mid-month, or whatever you had to do in order to get everything back online, the amount of hours it took to do that. I can't tell you how many times I had to help do that or do it. And then all of a sudden you're just like stressed out and you're like, I wish I would have never been on the front page of Dig. And obviously that stuff doesn't happen anymore with our scalable servers and caching and CDNs and everything like that. But I think the thing is I don't think there's just much benefit around it. I don't think people should be chasing millions of visitors in the first place. I think they should be, focusing on authentic, real communities on their website.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that. Like, do you want, 1 million visitors that do nothing on your website, or do you want 1,000 that convert every month?
Mm-hmm. I'll take the 1,000. And that was kind of the segue. I noticed that a lot of people on the web were really gearing for was the shift into email.
Mm-hmm.
That being the real, true, authentic kind of community. And I've noticed that too. My consumption of the web has changed over the years because of social media. Like I do find stuff on Facebook sometimes. Like I'll find stuff there, almost nothing. And then like news wise, I don't actually go to news websites. I have a couple apps that I use to surface breaking news for me. In terms of the communities that I really enjoy and listen to, like I'm on some Slack groups and some email newsletters. And so email newsletters, I actually do consume those. And I feel like that's the authentic web these days. Like people are sharing content that they've aggregated, that they pulled in from all these different places, like said, okay, here's like the top 10 articles that we found today, and they're awesome. They didn't post them on the web, they posted them inside this email newsletter that I can then read and digest.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm seeing the transition for, the generations after us. They're doing like Snapchat groups, right? Or, following people on Instagram. And neither of those tools are really kind of leveraging sharing in any real appreciable way. You're either a fan of someone or you're not kind of system that they have that exists, or these groups that are completely private and not exposed externally at all. And I think we're going to kind of see more and more of that as the next generation of youth look at the web and go, okay, like I can find stupid videos of my parents. I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to only like hide it within like Snapchat, and someone can view it once or twice and then it's gone into the ether apparently, right? Like I think that's more and more the kind of trend in terms of sharing and technology that we're going to see.
Yeah, and I was thinking about actually that the other day as a parent. It's something that's kind of a separate subject, but like you're talking about privacy and all these things, and it's like, to me, it actually ties in with the social buttons and stuff.
Sure. Social sharing is part of your like online identity.
Right. And so if I'm sharing content from somebody's website, right, whether it's within Facebook or whether it's on Twitter or whatever, people know about it, right? So those are considered like public things, public interactions that have happened. And I think nowadays people don't want all that. They don't want people knowing all the different things that are shared or whatever. They want something more private.
Yeah.
They want people to just say, "Hey, I like this article about politics on this side of the coin or this side of the coin," but they don't want to develop this big political battle on their Facebook newsfeed, right? So they share an article and they put it in a private group that they're in, or they put it in a private, community that they're in, people that aren't going to criticize them. And I think that this bullying concept has actually pushed people away from social sharing a lot. Like this bullying mentality that people don't want to deal with it. They don't want controversy. They're on there to read some interesting content and then, share it one-to-one because it's not controversial that way.
Well, if I'm running a business website, though, and I'm talking about like the latest real estate developments or investments that you should buy, I have to have a LinkedIn button, right? You got to share on LinkedIn.
No, you don't. So LinkedIn was really, really cool a few years ago, in my opinion. Like it was really just the place to hang out. Now I log into LinkedIn, and this is no joke at all. I try not to share too much on LinkedIn, but here's the thing. When I log into LinkedIn, I get like 80 messages from all these different developers. Can I work on your website? Can I develop a mobile app? Can I develop a mobile app? Can I have a mobile app to develop? Can I develop a mobile app for you? Literally like 80 messages about every 2 weeks. Mobile apps. Or I'm an expert in this. And people are spamming LinkedIn so much that I don't even bother. I can only think in the last like 3 years where I've found like 4 good articles on LinkedIn, 4 good interactions on LinkedIn. And it's a good place.
And again, so sharing in general on LinkedIn or having the share button for LinkedIn, it's probably not going to give you any benefit, even if you're in kind of that business space, even if your audience is kind of skewing a little bit older or, kind of more on the financial high end. LinkedIn also has their own like separate communities and groups as well. And a lot of time sharing within those groups don't really do much either. Sure, there are certain people on certain groups that'll have success on LinkedIn. I watch a bunch of stuff with Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talks all the time about his successes on all these different social platforms. But he's a very different personality with a very different brand, and he's got a whole suite of people working around the clock to share as much content in as many formats that actually kind of leverage the different platforms as possible. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a whole team working behind me doing that exact same thing, dissecting every piece of content I create, reformatting it in 20 million different ways and posting it on all the different social networks every single day. And I think that's, the fact that he can rise above the noise by kind of being the noise is a differentiator for him that most people can't do.
Well, that's what we were doing in the old days with like Dig and Reddit. We were like just taking, everyone was being like, okay, we're not going to be the noise. We're going to be the voice. Right. And I think that he's done a good job of saying, okay, all the platforms are mine and I'm going to be the voice. And he's done that a couple of different ways that I think are ethical, and a couple different ways that I might go, we were doing that back in the day and we kept getting smacked for it.
Right.
Like, buying shares and buying different things. He can't say he doesn't ever do that because he's talked about it, and leveraging those, the weaknesses of social networks that build his following or whatever. And it's happened like recently where there was, 3 or 4 recent people on Twitter that got banned, completely banned from Twitter for having, manipulating the social sharing and things like this. So I don't know, social media, in my opinion, for most businesses is a net negative. Really?
Yeah, because if you spend any money, time, or resources on trying to accomplish that goal, it's probably not going to get you the value that you want. You'd be better off creating amazing content that search engines will consume, rank, bring you people, versus or doing online advertising in a very kind of methodological. Man, I can't speak today. In a very specific way that will bring in the type of visitors that you need to your brand, to your site. And those kinds of things will give you a positive ROI, where social sharing these days, trying to promote on social, focusing on that, adding those buttons, I mean, they're really, like Krug said, they're not really giving you a positive ROI. And it's sad that that's happened. And it's sad that so many businesses, so many independent publishers, so many corporations really haven't caught up on that and understood that yet.
Well, there's a vacuum too. So I'm a part of all these different SEO communities as well. I've been doing search engine optimization for years. It's always been about getting traffic from Google. That's always been one of my passions. And then a bunch of groups that I was involved in, people that were involved in SEO, all of a sudden said, let's become part of the crowd that sells Facebook ads instead, right? And so there's a lot of the shift that went into social media in terms of buying advertising from them, like highly targeted, local, blah, blah, blah. And they found some success in that. And I'm not saying that there's zero success in social media in terms of what you can get out of it, but you want to be taking from their platforms, not giving to their platforms. And I think by having social sharing buttons on your website, you're actually giving content. You're willing to say, I'm going to give my content to Facebook, and that's where I'm going to put my hours of the day and my energy sharing my content on their platforms. So you're actually building their platforms. Like you talked about earlier, Facebook wants to keep those people, your visitors, on their sites. So those buttons actually serve to only really help those communities build themselves. Yeah. Whereas, in my opinion, what you want to do is build an email newsletter. You're capturing those fly-by-night customers to become your social media, your social network. You want to, if you have a big enough website, you want to create your own networks, your own, whether it's a Slack group or a bulletin board or an email newsletter. You want to do that. And I think that that's the thing. So if I were someone advising a publisher, I'd say, hey, instead of putting social share buttons, why don't you put a bar that asks people to put their email address in?
Or join our Slack community, yeah.
Join our Slack community. And those things, I think there's more value in it, and your ROI is going to be better. And it's a tough thing because, we all think about, the media is always talking about Facebook and Twitter, and they're the next big thing. And there's some value there, but the average consumer, when they're going to search for something or whether they're going to dig into something, they don't go to those places. There was a recent report out, I don't remember where I read it, but in 2017, the average user was spending 41 minutes on Facebook a day, 41 minutes. And it's now down to 37 minutes a day. And the age differential has...
Yeah, that's been interesting.
The age differential has gone in some really weird directions over the last 5 years, where before it was more of a younger crowd on Facebook in the beginnings, and there was no older people, and now it's totally shifted to where it's more older people.
So I don't think it necessarily shifted. I got to speak on this because this is kind of funny to me. I think what's happening is that the people that used Facebook in their college and university days, when Facebook was only for college and universities, those people, a lot of them are still on the platform and are aging with the platform. I think that Facebook itself is not appealing to the younger generation, so they're not signing up to kind of, infill those younger demographics. And I think that's going to be the thing that happens to Facebook, is it's actually just going to age out. We're all going to get older on Facebook, and no new users are going to come in. In our family, the only reason that younger people come on Facebook at all is because we use it for events management in the family. My wife has a large family, and so that's the only reason they ever come on Facebook anymore, is event management, to see when family birthdays are, or family camping trips and things like that. Otherwise, they avoid the platform completely. They wouldn't even have an account on there. And I'm of the same mind. I wouldn't have an account on Facebook, except that, people in their 50s, 60s, late 40s are on there, and we can't convince them to switch to another platform because they don't want to learn it, number one. And number two, we could never get the young demographic and the older demographic on the same platform anymore. Can you imagine teaching your parents Snapchat? Can you imagine, even me, I joined Snapchat and I was like, what do I do with this? This is stupid. The messages are disappearing and I can't go read them again. My memory is not very good, and now I've lost the message. So I mean, and that, now I'm going to have to take my walker and stuff like that. But this is the transition I think is happening. I don't think that necessarily young people are leaving Facebook. I just don't think any new ones are joining.
Well, here's a crazy thing for you. Like, one of the fastest growing social networks is one we don't even talk about. It's called TikTok.
Yes.
So
and Gary Vee is all over TikTok. He's got a whole bunch of videos and articles about TikTok already.
So the crazy thing, like, to me, is like TikTok is this other. So it's definitely social media. It's definitely social media in the most social media way. Like, there's never been a social media network like TikTok, in my opinion. And it's built by leveraging people from every walk of life. Like, it's almost like a convergence between social media of old and like modern interaction. It's really interesting because in my opinion, it's totally just cut out all kind of web publishers in general, right? So there's no way for web publishers to really leverage it except buying ads or somehow finding a way to make their product part of the social conversation. Like,
now, you're gonna have to explain what TikTok is. I only have like a very broad sense. Like, I it's out here. I know it exists, but I haven't signed up for it.
TikTok is like basically a social media network built around short videos.
So kind of like, what was it, like Vine, or what was the place where you had the 30-second clips that shut down?
I think that was Vine, if I remember right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Vine, but there's different social features built into it that make it different. And a few of them are like being able to interact with people around music and dance.
Right.
And those are big ones. So music would be the biggest one. Being able to take it's like a social media community built around and with and incorporating music clips and built around like challenges, pranks. Like, it takes all the things about social media of the old generations that we didn't do well and puts it into a new one. And I think it's going to be the biggest. I think it's going to be the next biggest thing in terms of where are all the kids at. Do you know what I mean? Like, where are all the kids on social media? They're not on Facebook. They're not on Snapchat. They're not on Instagram. Where are they? Everyone's going to be looking for them, and they're on TikTok, right? And it's like they're already TikTok influencers with 100,000.
Yeah. So I found a top 10 list of TikTok users, and there's at Lisa and Lena has 32.7 million followers. They're from Germany. Lauren Gray has 30.8 million followers. The 10th place person has 17.5 million followers. So, like, these are not small little groups, I guess, or small communities in terms of how these influencers work. But it also highlights how, in some ways, right, if you're a youth media business and you think that your content would do well on here, you're kind of already behind the curve unless you can convince one of these influencers to help you out, right? How are you going to build an audience of multiple millions of followers, once the platform has already reached the point where there's people that already have 32.7 million followers?
And you can do it. You can do it. You have to be able to really buy into the community, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah, so many people, it goes back to that kind of honesty and the real types of communication that are supposed to exist on social media.
Right, and I think that's particularly this like TikTok, for example. It's done well because it's not centered around a business or a brand. It's like centered around human interactions.
Now,
like how people interact. And each generation, I think, is going to come up with their own social media. You're talking about like Facebook and how it was with one group, and now it's kind of growing old with that group of people. And now you had other ones. I mean, other Twitter seems like it's almost like its own different generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have
like Instagram, and then Snapchat, and now TikTok.
And now you like TikTok, and there's all these different kind of waves of social media. And I think that the commonality is people want to connect with each other and have these interactions with each other. And in our day, the original social media, the social communities were like AOL Instant Messenger or bulletin boards or whatever. And now we're moving into this, like, we need to have video interactions in order to be part of a community, and it's different. Everything's changing. And I think the biggest thing is buttons on the web don't help you become relevant for different generations. For example, let's say you are an auto body shop in Dallas, Texas, right? Let's say you have an auto body shop, you have a website, right? And you said, I wanted to do something in social media today. Oh, if you asked me what you would do, I would say, you already have a website and you're not worried about getting traffic to the website, build a TikTok. Do you know what I mean? And do some crazy things around cars, or do some challenges around cars, and develop an honest, real community. No matter what you do, you need to develop an honest community. And I think the old solutions of yesterday that aren't working anymore are just putting up some buttons. That's not a real honest effort into social media. And my thing about any publisher in today's world, if you're going to do something, don't do it half-heartedly. Put all your effort into it, but really pick one place to own it, because no one can we can't put all this energy into things. If you really want to build Facebook, great, build a Facebook. Put all your energy into that one place as your social media platform.
Yeah.
Or pick Twitter. Great, you're going to leverage Twitter and become famous on Twitter for your business. Do it, but pick one and go for it.
I would recommend picking your website, because then you own your own content, you own your own location, you own your own social, you own your own user base, you own your own everything. But I agree with you, Krug, that don't spread yourself so thin that you can't really give a good effort in any of them. You can't really understand any of them to the level you need to. If you want success online, it really comes down to that, publishing the right content in the right way, in the right place, at the right time. And too many businesses just aren't doing that.
Yeah, and they're wondering why they need, for example, they need to leverage someone to get more traffic from Google. Or they want to buy more ads. Well, they're just not creating the right content.
Mm-hmm.
They're not marketing that content in the right way to get eyeballs onto it. They're not sharing it in the right social medias. And I'm not talking about social media in the way that Facebook or on these platforms, right? You can't just take your content and say, "Oop, I'm going to put it over here," and magically you're going to get more customers. No, it's reaching out authentically to the right communities. So let's say you're in a Facebook group in your hometown where your business is, and saying, "Hey, we're actually doing something cool. I wanted to share it with you guys."
Right.
We're doing something cool. We're going to give away, X things for military veterans on July 4th. Any military veteran can come do this on July 4th at our, business. Great. That's an authentic interaction. And I think that's the biggest thing is having these social media buttons is, to me, it's not really authentic. And
yeah, I think that's a real good place to leave it. So if you're thinking about adding social buttons to your website, or you already have them, maybe reconsider. Look at some articles about what it does to the performance. Turn it off and on and see what it does to the performance of your website. Look at how many shares you've actually received. Is there value there? Has there been a lot of users coming from those shares? Really try to analyze the value of social sharing, and if it is providing value, keep doing it, and if it isn't, adjust, pivot. Make sure your website is as fast as possible. Make sure your users are as happy as possible, and get rid of the clutter. Do you have any final words, Krug?
No, I totally agree. And if you don't know how to do any of those things, feel free to hit us up, because we can totally help you optimize your site for speed, and we can help you remove those social sharing buttons. And if you're worried about getting more traffic, we can definitely talk to you about some of those things as well. As always, Malcolm, it's fun to connect with you. Do these video chats, and I guess they call them podcasts nowadays or something.
You as well. Have a great day.